Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you will enjoy our session today. Thank you for joining us for this pre-event webinar leading up to the 10th edition of the GCC Regulatory Affairs Pharma Summit. My name is Dr. Moussli. I'm the co-founder and managing director of PRA Consultancy. I'm thrilled today to welcome today's session with all the speakers about bridging regulatory and patient access for orphan drugs. As we all know, orphan drugs plays a crucial and a critical role in addressing rare diseases. Yet, navigating the regulatory landscape and ensuring patient access remain always the challenge. Today's discussion will be shed light and putting on the strategies and collaborative effects required to overcome these barriers and challenges. We are honored to have all our speakers today with us, moderated by Mr. Mohammad Larbi, Head of Market Access International, SPIMACO, who will guide us through the vital conversation and see what can we do next in this orphan drugs market access. Dr. Larbi holds a PharmD with a specialty in the industry pharmacy from Monastir University and Paris Descartes University, as well as master degree in management in healthcare from Paris Sud University. With 17 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, he has developed expertise in market access, regulatory affairs, corporate affairs, and marketing across the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Larbi will have the honor to introduce our expert speakers, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible support of all the stakeholders who have made this session possible, and with our commitment for forcing dialogue that bridge the gap between regulatory frameworks and patients' needs. I hope you will find this session both insightful and impactful. Dr. Larbi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Mona. Thank you for the introduction and for also making this happen, bringing us all together to discuss such an important topic. I think that we usually give the credit and the gratitude for the end of the session, but let me start with extending all my gratitude and the panelists' gratitude to you, to your team, for making this happen, and looking forward to the 10th session of GCC Regulatory Pharma Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for attending this session. It's a personal privilege to welcome you all to today's webinar on bridging regulatory approvals and patient access to orphan drugs in the UAE, GCC, and even beyond. To start, let's consider a profound question. What does it actually mean to live with a rare disease? For patients living with such condition, but also for families, healthcare professionals, and more widely caregivers, it often means navigating a labyrinth of late diagnosis, limited treatment options, and a healthcare system that many times don't give the priority to their unique needs. By definition, rare disease affects a small percentage of the population. I will not go into details of the threshold that depends on the country, on the disease, and on the healthcare system. But if we think more widely, collectively, they impact a significant number of individuals. Globally, it is estimated that rare disease affect at least 3.5 to 6% of the population, translating into up to 450 million people worldwide living with rare disease. In the Middle East and North Africa, the prevalence is even slightly higher, leading to 2.8 million individuals affected and living by rare diseases, adding to that families, caregivers, and all the people indirectly impacted by that. While regulatory frameworks, especially here in UAE and GCC, improved a lot the access to those life-changing therapies, let's agree that regulatory approval is merely the first step. I'm not saying that because I'm into market access, because for me, actually, there are such many milestones, sometimes hurdle, before achieving actual patient access. The real challenge lies in bridging the gap between approval and ensuring this treatment actually reach the hand of patients. Today's discussion will explore market access milestones, how formulary decision, reimbursement models, supply chain dynamics would impact access to orphan drugs. We'll also delve into the vital roles of health economics and managed entry agreements, so-called also innovative contracting, or, and so on and so forth, will drive sustainable solution for patients, their family, and caregivers. To achieve such an interesting and important discussion, I'm honored to be joined by two distinguished panelists. Allow me also to call you fellows pharmacists, who will bring a wealth of expertise to this discussion. Dr. Adel Assy, Senior Manager of Pharmaceutical Supply Chain at M42 in Abu Dhabi, of course. He has an extensive experience in optimizing supply chain operation, but also influencing pharmaceutical policies and ensuring medication are available across healthcare settings. Welcome on board, Dr. Adel Assy, and thank you for being part of this panel. Looking forward to your insightful thoughts. Also, join me to welcome Dr. Mohammad Yousuf. Dr. Mohammad Yousuf is a seasoned clinical pharmacist at Sheikh Shakhbout. He brings an invaluable insights into formulary management, patient-centered outcomes, and the role of clinical pharmacy in addressing needs of patients, be it in rare disease and in other therapeutic areas. Last but not least, please, as we dive into the conversation, I invite you all to engage actively, to ask as many questions as you can, to take benefit from the presence of our esteemed speakers. Rare disease may be rare, between brackets, but our commitment to addressing them cannot afford to be. Let's explore how we can collaborate across healthcare providers, regulators, supply chain stakeholders to ensure that every patient has access, and in other words, no patient is left behind. Without further ado, let's begin. And let me start the discussion with you, Dr. Adel Assy, Dr. Mohammad Yousuf. And let's tackle together the current landscape of the orphan drug supply in the UAE. Dr. Mohammad, from experience as a clinical pharmacist, what are the processes that are used to ensure patient access to orphan drugs? And if you can also take us further and share out with us how formulary management and even committees within the healthcare institution approach decision for listing orphan drugs. The floor is yours, Dr. Mohammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Dr. Arabi, for this kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Amuna, for inviting me today to touch base for this hot topic, actually, the orphan medication and their access. As you know, all that we are converting now from the volume to the value-based healthcare system, in which one of its goals is to assure the equity and accessibility of the innovative medication to our patients. Going back to your question, Dr. Arabi, about the formulary or non-formulary management in our institution, actually the process for sure it starts with the physician when he has a need for a medication which actually not in our enlisted formulary, either in our institution as SSMC or in SAHA as a whole group. At that time, the physician will send us an email or a request by having this medication to be available in the hospital for one of his specific patients. But once we receive this request, actually we have multi-speciality in our clinical team. So according to everyone's specialty, he will handle with it. For the oncology pharmacist, clinical pharmacist, he will deal with the oncology request. For the neurology, he will deal with the neurology, and so on. So everyone according to his specialty. And then the first thing, he has to make sure that this medication has no alternative in our formulary, or if it has an alternative, that this alternative should be used before and the patient cannot tolerate it, or the patient progressed on it and he doesn't get any benefit from it. So in that time, we can go for the next step to make sure that the medication, to go for the profile of the patient, to make sure that the medication is already, what is the availability, not availability, what is the adverse reaction expected, what the toxicity
I think we lost you, Dr. Mohammad.
Can you hear me, Doctor?
Yeah, now we can hear you back, yeah.
As I told, it's after reviewing the request, the clinical pharmacist has to make sure that this medication has like established clinical trial, there is clinical effectiveness, what is the toxicity profile of this medication, and what is the expected number also that this medication will be available for from this physician. So we are sending, after we have this all background, we already are making the forecast of how many patients expected to be in this medication or new innovative medication, and we send it to the supply chain in which they will take the further step.
Okay, I think that I'm blessed by having a speaker, but also a fellow moderator, because you are making the right and the perfect transition to my follow-up question to Dr. Adel Assy. So thank you for that, Dr. Mohammad. So my question, Dr. Adel, would be about having your thoughts on the overview of the pharmaceutical supply chain in UAE, specifically for the orphan drugs, and how can healthcare institution, be it yours or more widely other healthcare institutions in the UAE, approach decision for listing orphan drugs. So take us please down the stream. After formulary listing, how do you manage, especially when it comes to patient flow and forecasting?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم and السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to discuss this vital topic. I think Dr. Mohammad had made it easy for me to, after the extensive review of a formulary inclusion, as Dr. Yousuf mentioned, it is essential that clear communication happens from the treating physician. When that treating physician identifies that therapy and how many or what is the forecasted number of patients that are expected to receive this therapy, the multidisciplinary decision happens at a level of the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, and beyond the non-formulary request, which I want to emphasize on that Dr. Yousuf mentioned, was initially we don't include things on formulary, especially when we have a rare disease. We need to make sure that the volumes are accurate, and we build up, and then they transition from being non-formulary to formulary, and I'm sure Dr. Yousuf will cover that piece. Once this communication arrives to supply chain, they are part, and this is my number one advice, the early engagement of the right stakeholders when it comes to supply chain and procurement, especially as a clinical pharmacist and by background myself, I encourage the early involvement, because the earlier we are involved, the earlier we will provide the clinical pharmacist team members, such as Dr. Yousuf, with the exact information to go back to the treating physician and tell him, yes, this medication is available, this is the lead time. But just for people who are non-procurement, lead time is the time required to get a medication from the point of purchasing to the point of receiving. So we set expectation to the treating physician, when can he have that drug ready for use? So that's the second piece. Once that is done, we have to communicate with the distributor or our fellow pharma industry colleagues to make sure that we have that alignment around the kickoff of that treatment on time, so that the physician will then make sure that he sets expectation to the patient when they can start the therapy. Once these three pillars are done in any supply chain, regardless if it's orphan or non-orphan, and I'll speak about what orphan or rare diseases differentiate from normal drugs. So regardless, as long as you have the accurate information from the treating physician, the impact, and Dr. Yousuf has mentioned something that's essential here. People tend to forget the formulary revision of therapies that are already existent on formulary. Because what happens to those is, if they are not if they are the same, but are deemed essential for the reasons that Dr. Yousuf mentioned, definitely the utilization here of the parallel therapies is going to be impacted. So we need to make sure that we make a holistic supply chain decision to also understand the impact of other therapies within the therapy area itself. Once that is concluded, what the difference with orphan drugs, to answer your question, Dr. Arabi, is
Yes.
the rareness of the disease, the limited number of patients, shelf life of the drug versus the lead time, to make sure that these pillars are addressed, checked on your checklist, and the drug is safe to be used once it's reached. Now, before we move towards the other agenda points, which are the pharmacoeconomics and accessibility, it's essential to point out one very important piece. Once the patient is recruited, where do we usually fall in communication is the refills. Is the patient responding appropriately? Is he okay on the drug? Are we okay in initiating the second and the third and the fourth order for that specific patient? Again, we're talking about non-formulary medication. Once it's established and there is a certain number of patients identified on that therapy, then this auto-replenishment assessment based on the bigger number of patients, it's easier to manage. It's still the same criticality, but it's a more of a dynamic process. I hope I answered your question.
Definitely, Dr. Adel, thank you for such a comprehensive overview of the dynamic of the supply chain. So to wrap it up, I guess that you took us through a very clear pathway. It all started with identifying the patient population, starting with non-formulary listing, which is a very challenging step because it needs even a more regular discussion between supply chain, clinical pharmacist, practitioner, and patient, and any other caregivers to take the decision to follow up the refill. And while probably the product is listed in the formulary, it's quite easier, but still we need to continue the monitoring when it comes to patient needs. And I think that the cornerstone of the discussion, be it on clinical pharmacy or supply chain, will still the unmet medical need, because it's at the start of the patient flow, at the segmentation of patient, and even it will be the first condition to say if the treatment is successful or not. So please stay with me, Dr. Adel, because you'll take it further right now. Please share with us what role does understanding unmet medical needs would play in prioritizing orphan drugs approval and formulary inclusion? And please, could you elaborate on the role of health economics and different metrics in such decision-making?
This is a great question, Dr. Arabi, and I'm sure there is too much to digest here. But what I'll do is I'll be very focused with my answer. Let's start with the health economics piece. Definitely, these orphan drugs have been through a thorough, extensive, expensive route of approvals of phase 1, phase 2, FDA approvals or whatsoever. However, balancing the cost effectiveness with the patient outcomes is essential. And that's why having a person with a clinical background that has that revenue cycle or this health economics hat, if I may say, is essential, because then you can bridge that language between clinicians, pharmacists, and non-pharmacists. Once that is identified, and since we're in a forum that discusses the GCC, and since I'm also I've been practicing pharmacy revenue cycle for the past 16 years. I would confidently tell you that we are blessed here in the UAE and other GCC countries where these therapies are at the most attention of governments, where they are deemed to be necessarily funded by the government-funded programs provided for the national population. And even if there's a sector of different patients that don't have access, we are blessed to have other organizations that usually cover these therapy costs. Depending on different routes and different institutions, we're not in the right framework to discuss this now, but we are encouraging other countries again to follow suit, because improving the quality of life of these patients in the patient outcome returns can be now quantified not only by a dollar sign, but even readmission rates. If people don't have access to this drug, the consequences of side effects, consequences of certain, I would say, consequences of not obtaining the therapy, either ED visits, readmissions, consequences, side effects. These are extensive costs on governments that they should understand are costing money. And that's why I'm saying here in the UAE, we're blessed of having a clear guidance when it comes to reimbursement. Now, to answer that piece, yes, it is still a limited number of patients, but it says a lot when you provide care and at the same time looking at the health economic piece, leveraging it with insurance coverage or government-funded programs. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely, Dr. Adel, and really glad to hear such, let's say, pharmacoeconomic acumen coupled with commercial acumen. I think that unmet needs are very important, and they are the driver of any decision making. And adding the top of that, budget impact and cost effectiveness would make any therapy efficient and any healthcare system sustainable. It's really difficult, you know, to have a clear discrimination between your roles, guys, because you are both bringing such patient-centered approach. And allow me to continue with Dr. Mohammad Yousuf and ask you, as a clinical pharmacist, what are the key patient outcomes that you'll be looking at when taking formulary or even named non-formulary patient decision? Can you please take us through that and share with us and with the audience what are the metrics and patient outcomes that you are looking at, Dr. Mohammad?
Thank you again, Arabi. Also, this is really a very interesting question. You know, the goal at the end is to serve the patient, making him improving his quality of life. This is really a necessary and one of the pillars which we all aiming for our patients, especially for rare disease patient. Maybe rare disease patient, maybe because, you know, I think you are serving or you're improving the patient service or quality of life for the patient, also for their families, for their caregivers. So I believe here the umbrella is bigger and already exceeds the patient himself. One more thing, I believe also that the readmission you have when you are treating a patient or providing him an innovative treatment, you aim also to reduce the number of ER visits, number of readmission, also to shorten or to reduce the length of stay of the patient. If a patient was admitted, for example, for 7 days and you have an innovative medication which can make this length of stay 2 days or 3 days maximum, so it's better to give it. And let me here also give one example, because this is very close example, just only last month, or to be honest, 2 months back. I have a patient who have something called thyroid eye disease. It is one of the rare disease illness, and the patient has the severe stage for that one. And there was only one option to have an orphan medication for his case. Other than that, the patient has to undergo surgery, and it's ophthalmic, very, very like specific ophthalmic surgery. And in the doctor himself, he explained for me that he has to go and make a surgery for the eyelid, and he has to go for the bones surrounding the eye. So it's really very risky surgery. And he told me the only option for this patient is to bring this medication for him. By the way, this medication that time, it was not registered even in UAE, and we already have like many like obstacles or like hinders to bring it overseas and to make it available for the patient. But really, when he provided us with the documents, with the evidence, even other than that, when you look for that patient, if it's your relative, and you're already helping this patient in order to improve his quality of life, to avoid one of the risky surgeries for him, I believe in that case, you will go for like to bring or to make this such medication available for him. regardless, for sure we have to look for the cost at the end, but you know you have to look at also from the other side. So I believe this the most going back to your question, Dr. Arabi, I believe quality of life, enhancing quality of life is a vital pillar for the patient, and also to have a patient who reduced his ER visits or length of his stay during his admission. This is also one of the key outcomes which we are all looking for.
Great, Dr. Mohamed Yousuf, and thank you for bringing some real life examples and to show us how sometimes it could be a no-brainer to go for the right medication instead of undergoing surgeries or more invasive and probably even less efficient intervention. And also for, again, bringing the patient and the clinical outcomes in as a cornerstone of any approach. I think that both of you guys shared with us a clear framework, what is going on, you know, let's say in the ideal world and what you are aiming to achieve every day for your patient and your institution. Now, probably let's take it a step further and try to address some challenges and also some solutions. So for the supply piece, of course, I'm calling to the bar Dr. Adel Assy. And please, doctor, after this ideal, streamlined process, I think that bringing 16 years of experience on supply and revenue cycle management, you for sure went through a lot of challenges, a lot of struggle. Some you are overcoming and some still to be managed. So please share with us as transparently as you can, what are the key regulatory challenges, the key pharmacoeconomic challenges when it comes to ensure sustainable supply for your patients?
Good question, Dr. Larbi, and I'll answer this from both revenue cycle piece and supply chain piece so that I can club my feedback together so that the audience can benefit the most. Let's just walk through, since and I speak specifically to the UAE. Now there's a robust process when it comes to registration of medication. Once that is done, there's a very important pillar, and Dr. Yousuf would agree with me most probably, is the payer being on board. The payer being on board for these rare diseases, and again, I'll leave that to Dr. Yousuf, but I can shed some light on this. It's essential to overcome obstacles is to come up with the criteria by the treating physician, endorse it to the payer so that it becomes a prerequisite. Because I don't want to dwell into details, but I'll tell you a very straightforward. Most of the payers would require what is called a pre-authorization for these drugs. When these pre-authorizations are requested for these orphan drugs, it is always beneficial to communicate beforehand with the regulator, be it the Department of Health or the EDE or the Dubai Health Authority, for example, in the UAE, to reach out to the payer with the treating physician specialty, gather those specialists on one table, and then they come up with the criteria of initiation and a criteria of maintenance, because it's very critical to understand, is the patient progressing well on the drug? Well, what are the metrics? So that when the pharmacist received the prescription, then they would be comfortable knowing those prerequisite criteria so that the patient doesn't have to wait long enough for the process to be closed. Because as long as these prerequisites are checked, done, covered, and written by the physician, the faster the prior authorization and the smoother it will go. So by that, I answered the part of regulatory involvement, pre-involvement of the payer, for a better seamless transactional view from my perspective for timely receiving of the drug. And from that, since I mentioned timely receiving, I'll piggyback on supply chain. All this happens with a collaborative approach, and where Dr. Yousuf works and where I work, we work hand in hand. The clinical pharmacy team or the pharmacotherapist or whatever you call our colleagues in your institution. We work together in this category of drugs to set the flags for the right time for ordering so that we don't miss the number of patients that are whether increase. And by the way, people sometimes forget also the decrease is very important as well. If the patient's doing well and he was removed of a certain drug, at the end of the day, having stock that is wasted, that's also a responsibility, Dr. Arabi. So to balance between those, it is essential to maintain that communication to identify the time of ordering and receipt. By that, I hopefully answered the idea of regulatory involvement and obstacles, and at the same time, the obstacles and how we can mitigate those from a supply chain operational perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adel. And yeah, completely. If I have two takeaway messages from your answer, is that like in supply chain or clinical pharmacy, early involvement of insurance is key, and putting all together different specialties and different stakeholders as early as possible will lead to reduce the burden of the waiting for the patient. And I think you summarized probably supply chain in one word. It's all about having the no lean supply, but also no overstock. So yeah, I think that it's easy to say, but probably it's a challenge every day to achieve. And just as a heads up for you and for Dr. Mohammad, I'm receiving a lot of questions on insurance, be it from fellow pharmacists, from practitioner, and also from my fellow industry stakeholders. So we'll be probably addressing it in more deeply in the Q&A session. So please, guys, continue to ask your question. I'm reading them and going through all of them. And I see a lot of follow-up questions, and some of you are asking such a question that I probably need to hand over the panel discussion to you guys. So continue. And Dr. Mohammad, this question is for you, but please do not hesitate to build on it later, Dr. Adel. So one of the solutions that we are all trying to assess and to implement for orphan drugs access is patient access programs and managed entry agreements. So could you please explain how those programs are structured and probably concretely rolled out at your institution to ensure timely and equitable also access to orphan drugs? And are there any barriers to such programs, any regulatory barrier, anything that we need to do? And please also you can address your question and challenge to the audience, the stakeholder from industry in the audience, because I think it's a hand-on-hand process to bring those programs to life.
It's a very interesting question again, Arabi. I have to thank you for it because, we have the medication, which is very good, but what about the access for it? So if it's affordable, this is a good part, but what if it's not accessible? Important to know that in Abu Dhabi, and as Dr. Adel maybe mentioned, that we are blessed here in Abu Dhabi or in UAE, that there are many tools for supporting the utilization, especially for the innovative medication to our patients. The patient support program or patient access program and the managed entry agreement, maybe Dr. Adel will talk better about it or elaborate better about the managed entry agreement. But let me start with the patient access program, and maybe in the Q&A session or at the end we can also mention other mechanisms which can enhance the utilization and the access for these expensive medication. For the patient access program, it's not actually a new term. We are using it in our institution since maybe a couple of years. I think it's the third year now even. We are using the patient support program to help our patients who have high out-of-pocket or they have no insurance and they cannot afford these high innovative medications. So by referring, actually it's case by case, by the way. So every single case has its criteria. The physician has to fill up some documents and also the patient has also to provide some documents which also support or which tells that the patient really eligible for this patient access program. And usually it's in a specific medication. Now the industry companies, they are already widening their range of medication to be involved or to be in the patient access program. But it's very important to know that if the medication is under this umbrella or not, the patient is eligible or not by some criteria, the physician, and for sure with the help of the clinical pharmacist, and for sure the patient access program, the main company here, which is already taking care about it. So this is all, these three parties are involved, plus the patient for sure, in order to know the status of the patient. After that, we already communicating and sending this all through digitalization and through like electronic database and electronic site. We are sending for them in order to make sure that the patient will be eligible for the patient access program or not. And sometimes they give him a cap or like an limit that the patient, for example, will be provided or be covered by the first 6 cycles of, for example, if it's an oncology patient, but he has to, for example, for the 7 and 8, he will not be able. So there are many actually schemes for that, but the majority of the patients, especially now, you know, the mandate, even you cannot take all the patient under the ABM mandate umbrella. So there will be some patients who will be needed urgently and necessary to be under the patient support program. And as you mentioned, Arabi, what is the importance of the patient support program? I'll give you one example, happened just recently, last month also. I want to share with you some real scenarios. Actually, the biosimilars, this is my area of interest. So we last month, we already, because there's DOH updates about the use of biosimilars, so we were selecting one of the biosimilars, and we wanted to put it in our formulary because it's like reasonable price and good price. But within our searching, we found another biosimilar. It's maybe little expensive than the biosimilar A or the previous biosimilar. But when we asked for it, we found that it's already covered by, or it can come for the patient who cannot even afford it. There is some patient access program for this second biosimilar. In addition, the manufacturer company also providing the home care nurse for some selected patient, for sure the elderly patient who cannot like give them the injectable form, who cannot take this injectable by themselves. So you have to look for the whole picture. So, and this I would like to emphasize in that importance of having a patient support program for the specific medication. For us as a committee, it will be for sure the priority to select a patient which already has or can be under the umbrella of the patient access program. I think that the other part of your question is the barriers of utilizing the patient support program. You know, I think one of the barriers, which I believe it's still till now, even I'm telling you are 2 or 3 years now, that is still there is lack of awareness about this support program, even from the physicians, from some pharmacists, and for sure from many patients. Maybe they are not aware about that, if this medication will be under this one or not, can be supported or not. Even some physician or healthcare providers, they still not aware about that this company or this medication can be afforded for a patient who cannot pay for it by patient access program. I believe this is one of the barriers. The second barriers, which I face it sometimes, because sometimes I'm helping the physician in order to fill the criteria and fill the documents. I believe maybe sometimes it's lengthy and more complex process for some, like some scenarios, and making difficult maybe, and you have to make sure that every document is available. So sometimes, and when you apply and then you get rejection because, for example, you are missing some of the documents. So I believe if you have like some friendly process, or like some determined or delivered some friendly process in order to have this medication under the patient support program, this also will have a higher impact.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed Yousuf, and thank you also for speaking all of our minds. I think that all of us as pharmacists, as healthcare professional, we are advocating to look at the added value and the comprehensive value of a drug and of a healthcare intervention, be it from the pharmacoeconomic point of view, from the supply sustainability, and also the added value to patient and healthcare professional. And I may add to that patient support program are also a sign of commitment of an industry player or a hospital player to the region, to the country, and to the patient. And it's kind of reassurance for a sustainable supply and sustainable relationship. I think that before moving to our Q&A session. And again, as a heads up, we have a lot of questions covering different topics that you already went through, but probably people will need a deeper dive into them. A question for both of you, and please feel free to step in as you wish. How can healthcare providers, regulators, supply chain stakeholder, and industry stakeholder collaborate together to effectively bridge the gap between regulatory process and actual patient access? So how would all of us would collaborate to transform this registration certificate and price approval into an actual box of drug in the hand of a patient? So floor of yours, please, whoever is ready to step in first.
So I'll make it in the benefit of time, Dr. Arabi, and hopefully we'll answer the questions. I've seen some questions, so in the benefit of time, I'll limit my answers to 1 minute so that I can hopefully be focused. So to answer your point, I think although this looks like textbook language that I'm going to say, but I've seen it, I've tested it, and I've lived it, bringing all the right stakeholders on the same table with full transparency, patient-centric decisions will be achieved, 100%. I've lived it for the past 10 years specifically, that when you have the right physician, with the right clinical pharmacist, with the right collaboration from the regulator and the payer, plus the right presence of the industry in terms of pricing and availability to match the requirements of budget burdens, but at the same time providing the care to patients. We've seen it as Mohammad, as Dr. Yousuf mentioned, and where I work in M42, we also treat a lot of rare diseases. So we've both lived this before, and I think we've achieved it as long as there is transparency, communication, and one goal. Although it looks like textbook language, but this applies to all, because what happens is there are fragmented discussions that always they add no value. But one thing happens, patient suffers because it takes a long time to reverse engineer those fragmented decisions. My final comment is, start the discussion with the right stakeholders all together in one chain or even one table, and then progress by amending those discussion points, pillars, criteria, what it may be, and trust me, the output would be positive for our patients. Thank you.
I'm completely fine with this statement, and if there is something that we need to go زي ما الكتاب بيقول by the textbook, it should be healthcare and should be specifically orphan drugs. So yeah, it's about sharing the value of transparency, early involvement, and scientifically substantiated decision making. Dr. Mohammad Yousuf, any comment, any build on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me copy from Dr. Adel points that I think there is no patient should be left behind taking his medication, other than innovative or non-innovative medication. This is the first message which I'd like to deliver today. The second thing, yeah, as Dr. Adel mentioned, that all the stakeholders should work together, align together, be hand by hand, that to serve the patient. Maybe one thing I would like to add, especially because we are this webinar about the orphan mitigation of disease, I believe we need two things here in UAE, and I believe it's already start to work on it successfully. First thing that the registries, I believe we have to establish our own registries here in UAE for the different orphan diseases. The second thing also that the patient-centric or the patient advocacy people, they should be also available when the discussion. And maybe I'll add something also, the real world data. Maybe also this, because as you know, all for the orphan medication, in order to be approved, there is some like uncertainty, let me say it, uncertainty about the endpoint, because you know they are using or are recruiting low number of patients in the clinical trial. So there is some debate about the efficacy endpoint. Is it valid, certain, uncertain? So I believe to get exit from this dilemma, the presence of real world evidence or real world data is necessary. And I believe here in Abu Dhabi and even in Dubai or Northern Emirates, you have a strong e-claim system and strong electronic system in which you can tackle or track any medication and to have idea about the whole medications used or rejected for the patients. This is from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed Yousuf, and thank you for this very clear and very comprehensive overview of the patient access to orphan drugs in UAE. I think that we can start now tackling the audience question. There are a lot of them. Allow me just to take it probably upstream, starting with the last piece of the access, which is the managed entry agreement, to the first piece, which is formulary listing. So first question is for you, Dr. Adel Assy. As you are at the cross path of supply chain and pharmacoeconomics, can you share with us some, let's say, concrete example of managed entry agreement, be them financially based or pay for performance based? Did you come through a real world example in your institution or not? And if you can share, of course, without disclosing any confidential data, what kind of agreement are you going through?
Sure. So let me just again, what I'm sharing here is not is public information and might not be applicable to my institution per se, but I'm aware of the program and I'm aware of different dynamics of how it works. So let me give you an example. Although not an orphan drug, but the regulators here started what is called a risk-sharing agreement for a category of medication. And Dr. Yousuf would echo me here. The class of PCSK9s, you need to there was a risk-sharing agreement that was a pilot that some regulators are trying to extrapolate to other therapies. Of course, we're not talking about orphan drugs here, guys. We just want to make sure that we're a patient with rare disease will be treated regardless. So let's be very focused on this. But what I'm giving an example of is outcome-based reimbursement, value-based reimbursement, and risk-sharing agreements to prove or to encourage manufacturers for better R&D, for better outcomes for patients, to see why patients are or are not responding to drugs. So the example I've lived or seen is PCSK9s, and where the documentation and criteria, and as Dr. Yousuf mentioned, is a pillar we're blessed to have the data banks, if I may say, through Malaffi, through eClaims data, which is a blessing, clubbing this data to identify the pool of patients and who is the launching phase, and then following up with patients if they've done their lab tests, are they responding to a certain drug, and if they're not responding, what will the manufacturer do to pay back the regulator, especially for government-funded programs? So this is an end-to-end example where there was a drug identified, the process was identified, there's a third party legally approved by the Department of Health that was involved, and how to monitor if patients are even complying with their dose. And this is a very important point. You can do whatever you want, but if there's no compliance of the right administration of the drug at the right time, then you don't actually get the right outcome. So an end-to-end monitoring process is important to make sure these managed entry agreements are actually beneficial. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, completely. I think that we are now ready to tackle the insurance piece. And let me start with one very concrete question, but we can take it further because there are a lot of questions around this insurance piece. So I'll read the question as I receive it. As orphan drug providers, so I assume the question is about pharma industry, should they contact the insurance entity for raising the awareness for the indication and medication dispensing process in order to facilitate the process of reimbursement? I assume the answer is no, but probably we can go beyond. And yeah, I still echo your recommendation. Sorry, Dr. Adel, on this early involvement and this open discussion. So please, let's make it more concrete if you can.
Okay, so I understand. Sorry for interrupting you, Dr. Larbi, but
no
let me tell you, whoever is asking the question, I'm sure he's saying it out of a driver of care to patients. True, but the good thing is here that the regulator is on board. You have a channel that bridges between the patient and the payer, which is the regulator. If you're asking my professional advice, reach out to the regulator. The regulator will then liaise through their payer sector department within the departments of health across the boards of the GCC or even the UAE, they have a department that liaises with the payer to introduce those guidelines and the benefit and the need based on the patient criteria and the anticipated patient volumes within the country, depending on the prevalence of disease.
Yeah.
So my recommendation is always go through the regulator.
Perfect. And this also addresses the question from Dr. Wafa Rafiqi, who was asking about the role of regulatory department in patient access. I think that you nailed it now. Dr. Mohammad, Yousuf, anything to add on that?
Yes, and let me just for sure, mashallah, yani wafaytu kafayt, as we said, but just let me add some point here. Yeah, I think that structured data or structured e-claims is very important in order to have to build in on it. So if you'd like to go to the further step, you have and to make sure that the medication which you already bringing is already it will not medication. And as you know, I think there's like good steps done in Dubai, especially like Ijada program. I think you all know, you heard about Ijada program. I think it's tracking or like focusing on this point that in order to make the guidelines, especially for the orphan medication or even for non-orphan medications, in order to like listen or to reduce the number of rejections. So we have the medication, we'll give it to the right patient with the right indication for the right people. So it's very important from the beginning to have like this criteria when you go on.
Thank you very much. Probably one last question regarding insurance. It's about how, it's a question, I think, from a clinical pharmacist or a practitioner. So how I can accelerate the insurance approvals for an orphan drug for expat in my hospital, so non-national in my hospitals. Anything to build on that, please?
Well, that's a, and Dr. Yousuf, I'll let you elaborate more. That's a bit, to answer that question, I would tell you there are some factors that are required to know. What is the insurance premium of that patient? Remember that insurances at the end of the day have premiums, especially if we're talking about non-government funded. I'm an expat, and my insurance is considered under the category of a commercial insurance. So commercial insurances are paid beyond premiums. So what is the category of the patient's insurance? That's one. Two, is there a limit for that for drug utilization? Three, is that disease area part of his schedule of benefits? That's why it's very tough to give you a yay or nay answer on how to tell you the key. The issue is with commercial, you have those pillars because it's a premium-based insurance, and the more you pay for a premium, of course, the wider the coverage. But definitely, if it's an indicated coverage and the premium of the insurance is covering it, then the answer to your question is very simple. As long as you provide the FDA guidelines or the EMA guidelines of the disease treatment and the criteria, as long as the patient treats it, then the insurance or the payer is not at a level of rejecting it. So I hope I made it clear. It's not easy to answer with yes or no or one specific thing because there are dependencies, if I may say. If all is clear, the only thing that you can expedite is provide the guidelines, the paperwork, the FDA EMA guidelines, and you're good to go.
Great.
Yeah.
And we appreciate a yes or no question because that's the beauty of our job, guys. It's about thinking and overthinking and coming up with solutions that are not, black or white, but navigating the gray zone is very stimulating intellectually.
If you allow me, Arabi, just I can add something about about what happened. Yes, it's very important to know the premium of every patient for sure. But also, on the other hand, I think every patient deserves to be treated with the medication which really he deserves or suitable for him. So some maybe doctor, I think that the questions comes from healthcare provider or some physician. Maybe sometimes when you have a patient with like low premium or low insurance card, maybe we'll go for sure with the basic or the non-innovative, let me call it non-innovative medication. But if the patient really deserves and he's already eligible for this kind of treatment, don't hesitate to go for it and write it for your patient. Maybe you'll find some obstacles in the beginning from the insurance. And sometimes even we have it in a daily practice, you know. Sometimes even the medication is like it's labeled for that indication. You'll find a reply from the insurance company that it's you have to send for the off-label. What is the reason why you have to send off-label? Unfortunately, maybe because the guidelines is still not updated for this for the payers or some specific payers for sure. I'm not generalized. So this is the first thing. Second thing, as we mentioned, we have the patient access program as other solution for this kind of patient who cannot accommodate or afford this type of medication. We still have the mandate, especially in the governmental hospitals. So I believe if the patient at the end, I would like to focus on this message. If the patient really deserves and need this medication, this will be like a very important treatment for him. Don't hesitate to go for it, prescribe it for the patient, go through the process, and for sure, at the end, the patient should get it. And thank you.
Perfect.
I agree with Dr. Arabi, with Dr. Yousuf, that other routes can be explored, maybe not through the patient's premium. Thank you, Dr. Yousuf, for bringing that up, because the patient is the center of our decisions. Thank you for reminding me, Dr. Yousuf.
And that's also one of the questions that I received from the audience about the compassionate use. I think that's a very specific solution also that we can bring on the table when it comes to orphan drugs and even beyond. So let's get back to the
square one. Can I make
one.
one comment about compassionate use? Sorry, Arabi.
Of course,
sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just I think because compassionate use is actually a new term, like relatively new term. Usually because we are using it, to be honest, for like, I remember just last quarter, we used it for a couple of patients who has multiple myeloma. I don't want to go through details, but this usually it's compassionate use. It has condition. It has like certain criteria that the medication should not be, or this before the registration of the medication. So the medication for this patient, and the patient should be in the latest stage. For example, he tried first or second or third line, and he is now in the latest stage, and this the only treatment available for him, and the medication is still not registered in the country. In that time, some companies, for sure, it should be also FDA approved, and the IRB also, they have to be approving it, and the institution also approving this process. In that time, we can afford it for our patients as a compassionate use. And I'm telling you, we started already like last quarter by bringing some medication, especially in the oncohema, for as a compassionate use for our patients.
Great, thank you for elaborating on that, Dr. Mohammad Yousuf. I think that now we can deep dive into the first step, which is formulary listing. I have received a lot of questions. Some of them are from practitioner, and you have very concrete question for both of you from different practitioners asking how can they concretely reach out to you as a supply chain pharmacist, clinical pharmacist, to raise an unmet medical need, to raise awareness about a new drug that they are aiming to prescribe to their patient. How can they concretely reach out, and how can you organize the process in order to make it happen ultimately?
So let me just start with something. My question to to a practitioner or everyone on the webinar today. The success, and I hope Dr. Yousuf will agree with me, the success of a utilization of drugs always lies within the jurisdiction of the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. In other places, they call it Medication Management Committee. In other places, they call it Formulary and Therapeutics Committee. Whatever you call it, if they are meeting regularly with specific guidelines, terms of reference, the right voters, the right attendees, meeting the quorum, have a specific way of discussing the drugs and with criteria, and ultimately meeting the quota of at least meeting once a month, definitely you will definitely reach to what you require. Now, unmet medical needs, as I said, and as Dr. Yousuf said in the beginning, what you specifically do in any formulary discussion, and let's keep it simple to a pain management med, or let's say a PPI. There are 7 PPIs in the market now. Do we need 7 PPIs on our formularies, especially complex providers? I don't believe so. However, if we have 6 or 7, why do we need 6 or 7? A third, and you keep say 2 or 3. And if you want to add a fourth, it has to be clinically justified and proven to be of a clinical benefit beyond the ones on the formulary, and you need to assess the impact of utilization of those other therapy area molecules as we stated. So as long as you have a solid PTC process, I believe that will solve many issues. Dr. Yousuf?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Probably,
Actually,
before answering, I'll have probably more specific question for you as a clinical pharmacist. How do you interact on a day-to-day basis with your fellow physician in the hospital, and how do you interact and how do you bring their concerns to the PTC or whatever committee is addressing the formulary at your level? How this interaction and this relationship will translate and is rolled out on your daily practice, please?
Thank you. But just let me give us take from Dr. Adel comments that yes, if you have robust and strong structured PTC, really this will facilitate the addition of the medication. I would like also to add something from the examples which mentioned by Dr. Adel about the PPIs or the PCSK9 inhibitors, which mentioned before that for us, when introducing a new medication, we have to do something called the class review. So for example, if the medication is entered today and approved in the PTC, after 6 months, we have to do a class review. For example, we entered one of the new PPIs, the fourth, for example. So is it utilized correctly? What's the advantage clinically or economically it has been added by utilizing or by approving this formulary or new formulary medication? So I believe the importance of the class review is like highly important in order to know what can be given, what can be deleted, what should be added, especially like every day there is a new medication coming to the market. You cannot put all the medications in your formulary for sure. You have to be very selective, especially if you have like a constrained budget. This, like, I would like just to follow what mentioned by Dr. Adel. For your question, back to your question, Dr. Arabi, yes, actually, our physicians, to be honest, and as Dr. Adel mentioned, in the PTC, there is like a representative from each specialty. So for the onco we have, for the mahima, for the cardio, for the pain management, for like pediatric neurology, whatever we have, like a representative doctor, usually he's the head of department or one his proxy is already one like is representative for his department and is a member in the PTC pharmacy therapeutic committee. For the actually like in a weekly basis, we have like a new request for a medication which really needs a lot of force. But let me just take this chance also to thank my colleagues and the clinical team who are reviewing also these requests and prioritizing which one to be for this patient and which one to be class A as importance or B or C. So it's very important also to classify the importance or to give like ranking for each medication. If it's life-threatening, you have not to be delayed in order to bring it to your patient. Other medication, the patient can stay or can wait some months in order to be taken because there is some alternative. He is already on it for the time being. So I think this all criteria or all points, we have to look for it when we considering the addition of any medication.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. I think that we almost covered everything. One last question. It comes also from a follow from industry also. Very interesting, and it's about, I think probably it's a little bit out of the scope, but I'm really keen to hear your thoughts about that. How we can consider giving incentive to companies that are bringing orphan drugs, be them locally manufactured or near-shored in the neighboring GCC countries or the Middle East, to make sure to strengthen and increase the resilience of the supply chain. Do you foresee any incentive that we need to bring on the table to strengthen the resilience of the supply chain, Dr. Adel?
Very sensitive topic to answer, Saraha, but I'll tell you one statement. We are very proud to tell you that we are, I would say, custodians of in-country value. So when we say that we want and to incentivize, I think the right word is encourage. So encouraging our local manufacturers to produce medications that are deemed essential for patient care, may it be orphan, rare, by obtaining the market authorization from the original originator, if I may say, or even a non-patent molecule that is now obsolete for one reason or another, and locally manufacture it, we're all in. Myself and Dr. Yousuf would love to not have obstacles when it comes to lead times. Everything should be readily available. But is this the fact? What we want is to encourage local manufacturing. So we are all on board with that message.
Thank you, doctors. I think that we covered everything, or almost everything. And before closing and wrapping up on your key messages, I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Mona, Sean, Catherine, and all the PRA team for making this happen. Really grateful for this honor for myself to be part of such a discussion. Very grateful also to all the attendees that made it till the end of the session, and I hope that you all took the maximum of benefit from this discussion. And I, for sure, invite you all to attend the 10th GCC Regulatory Pharma Summit, because we'll take this topic further and alongside with other topics. So it will kickstart on the 17th of February, and hope we'll meet a lot of you and as much as possible of you during those days. And of course, last but not least, thank you, Dr. Adel Assy. Thank you, Dr. Mohamed Yousuf. It was a pleasure preparing the session with you. It was a pleasure to hear your insight, and I'm sure that a lot of our attendees and myself will build on those insights to continue bridging this regulatory with actual patient access. And I'm really glad that we will meet together and we'll continue to build this relationship and to build on your insights. Allow me, after 1 hour and 50 minutes of deep discussion, to close the meeting, saying that regulatory approval is the start of the journey, but true success is access. It's measured, for me as a pharmacist at least, by a patient holding a box of drug on its hands. Ultimately, this is the success of all of us, from the manufacturers to the supply chain, coming through regulator, payers, clinical pharmacists, physicians, families. A patient holding a box on its hands is our success, and it's our common success. So let's continue to work together to turn approval into access and innovation into impact. Thank you all, and see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.